This is Jill Pack with the Seasons of Joy podcast. This is episode number 98, entitled A Conversation with Clarice. Are you a woman of faith who is struggling to navigate your current season of life? Do you feel like life is just happening to you instead of for you? My name is Jill Pack. I'm a certified life coach and a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I want you to know that no matter your season or circumstance, it is possible to create a more joyful life. And I would love to show you how. Are you ready? Let's go. Hello, my friends. I have a great episode prepared for you today, but I wanted to first remind you about my one-day workshop called Navigating Midlife with Grace, Strengthening Connections with Yourself, Others, and God. The purpose of this workshop is to help empower women of faith in the mid-season of life as they work on deepening their relationships with themselves, with others, and with God, and providing them with practical tools and strategies to do just that. This is an opportunity to gather with other women of faith in a safe and supportive space to share experiences and connect with one another. So watch for more details to come soon. I'm also going to be releasing my 100th podcast episode in a couple of weeks. I can't believe I'm going to be hitting 100 episodes, and so I wanted to do something really special to celebrate. So I'm going to be doing a giveaway. So as we get closer, just watch for more information so that you can celebrate with me too. Now on to this week's episode. I'm excited to share this conversation with you that I recently had with my friend and fellow coach colleague, Clarice Paulson. Clarice is a young adult and a certified life and trauma-informed coach. She works with those struggling with eating disorders and disordered eating. Clarice supports her clients in challenging negative or intrusive thoughts, processing emotions, finding peace of mind, and the self-compassion or esteem found inside of themselves for themselves. You're going to love this conversation with Clarice. All right. I am with Clarice Paulson today. She's a fellow life coach and friend, and I'm so excited to share this conversation with you. I'm going to begin by having Clarice tell a little bit about herself and how she came into coaching. So, Clarice, take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Jill. I got into coaching kind of on accident because I really didn't know about coaching until I was actually needing to use it. I was just coming out of high school, and in high school, I really was struggling with an eating disorder. And so I was hospitalized for some time, and getting out of that hospital and feeling my brain change when I began to nourish myself consistently was huge. I call it my awakening because I really thought I became like this full person all of a sudden. I had feeling in my body and my mind. I was becoming someone, whereas I was kind of just staying sick before. And so I was going into college, and I had a coach, and I had a dietitian, and I had people on my team that were supporting me. I had a therapist. And I found that I was being really impacted by coaching more than I was by therapy. Because therapy had its place in my life, but coaching was what was driving me forward and getting me excited and making me go to the next day, versus kind of rooting through my past where I know I made a lot of maybe not mistakes, but I just wasn't happy living in those details that had left me stuck for so long. And so COVID hit, and all of a sudden I was like, I don't want to do online school. I want to do something different. And my mom and I kind of sat down and we decided, okay, I'm going to become a coach only so I can know the tools. I want to know what my coach is doing so that I can do it on myself, kind of cut out the middleman. Um, and so I went into coaching kind of begrudgingly, like not wanting to get certified. But as I went through this certification process and was introduced to some of the most amazing women that I've met, and men that are in this sphere of coaching, I just fell in love with connecting with people and finding that kind of spark of joy within people when they find something that they value or that they want to build on or create or curate in their life. And so 2020, I was certified as a life coach, and now I work with struggling young women who are struggling to embrace themselves and their bodies, and really wanting to bloom into the life that they're intentionally creating, but feel like they can't for certain reasons.
I love this so much because we didn't really say how old you are. How old are you?
I'm 23, so I'm college
23.
age. Yeah.
Yeah, so I could be your mother. I actually have an almost 23-year-old. So, yeah. But I love this perspective. I think it's such a needed perspective from someone your age to just add more, yeah, more perspective. And as an older woman, I do work with women your age, and I see a lot of struggles there. And so to have a peer, right, a peer that has these tools that can share them in a way that I can't as an older person, right? And so it's so needed. So I just want to applaud you for doing the work to get where you are. I just think it's so beautiful.
Well, thank you.
Yeah,
I love what I do,
beautiful.
honestly.
Yeah,
I just think it impacts who I am as an overall person and as a
yeah,
student and as a sister. And I love working with people who are my age who are struggling because I think if I had known the tools that I was taught in like high school or going into college, it would have made a huge impact on where I ended up. And not that I'm unhappy with where I ended up, because
mhm.
clearly I'm creating my dream life, I kind of say.
Yeah,
I'm very happy with where I've ended up and who I'm becoming. And I'm just excited to see people who are my age and wanting to do that same thing, but feels that they can't because of something inside of themselves.
yeah, yeah,
Which is so not true. And it's like, oh, I just want to show the people the mirror that I can hold to them, so that they understand like their potential that they're living in and that they have inside of them.
yeah.
Um, and it's just wonderful. I love it.
So beautiful. I love how you said it was an awakening because interestingly enough, that's how I view it with myself at a different age, right? I was like
Mm,
50
mhm.
when I was hitting a different season, but we all have these different seasons in our life
Yeah.
that I
Mhm.
think um, can invite an awakening,
Right.
right? Because we're transitioning to something we've never done before or been a place we've
Mhm.
never been before. And so we can awaken to something pretty magical
Mhm.
instead of kind of like a resignment or a dread, right?
Mhm.
Or confusion or lost, however you want to name that. But I just think I love how you viewed it as an awakening because I think that can happen at any age.
Yeah. I love that you call it that same thing as well,
Yeah.
because like
Yeah.
that's kind of what keeps us humans like progressing, is having
Yeah.
those moments of what we may feel like idleness or the transformation or like the in between. Some people are like, well, I'm in a weird in between phase right now. I'm
Yeah.
like, that's so awesome for you. Like,
Yeah.
what are you learning? What are you figuring out? Like, how are you taking the experiences that you're having in these moments to um, kind of transform into those next coming chapters that you have? And it's
Yeah.
wonderful.
Yeah. To use it as a place or a way to be empowered instead of
Mhm.
disempowered, right? Like
Right, right.
there's just such a different energy
Mhm,
from viewing it as a place of awakening. It's just,
mhm.
there's so many possibilities from a place like that, right?
Right, and I think as
Yeah.
coaches, it's easy for us to kinda say that and be like, "Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, we just have to shift our mindset about it,"
Yeah.
and yet at the same time, like, it really is sometimes just that, being like, "Okay, well, what am I refocusing on, or what am I pivoting towards?"
Yeah.
Because that's really where the excitement comes from, is it has to come from inside of yourself of
Yeah.
saying, "Okay, this is new. This is something that there's something scary on the horizon, or there's nothing on the horizon, and I wanna make the most out of it." And it's not
Yeah.
gonna be an everyday thing maybe of like, you have to put in a ton of energy, to
Right.
have this transformation happen, but it's slowly gonna be evolving within you. And I think if we just break that open more and more, it's gonna be vulnerable, but it's gonna be worth that process.
Yeah. So beautiful. And something came to me as you were saying that. Sometimes I think with any age, but especially I see it with people your age, is the uncertainty can can be scary too, right? Because you're at
Mhm,
this kind of this place in your life where it's not all necessarily laid out for you, right? Like you're going
mhm,
to school and that part is in your life, but like where you're going to end up or exactly what
mhm,
profession you're going to choose and maybe who you're going to marry and how many kids you have, like that's still
mhm.
unknown. And I think sometimes that can feel um uncomfortable too and feel we can feel afraid in that space. But when we
Oh,
can shift,
100%.
right, when we can shift our perspective to that there's that isn't doesn't necessarily have to be a scary place.
Mhm. And I think some of that uncertainty can also just come from, I mean, yes, we think we have this laid out path, but then if we are somehow I say with air quotes, because
Yeah.
let's be real, we're all not on that perfect path in some way, shape, or form. And
Yes.
yet, like, we so see each other as, well, we have to be on this path. And if I'm doing something that's different, that's not aligned with what my peers are doing, that's uncertain because that's even more scary because I'm not going with the flow.
Yeah.
And again, like that takes a lot of mental work to try to shift that position too, of
Yeah.
like, okay, I'm creating and making my own path, and I don't have to stick to what
Yeah.
maybe my peers are doing in school if I just want to drop out, or yes,
Yeah.
I'm not married yet and I'm only 24 or something.
Right. Right.
um,
Right.
it
I
doesn't
love
mean
that.
like the uncertainty, it can be so exciting, and
Mhm.
it doesn't necessarily mean you're on the wrong path because there is no wrong path.
No. And really, I think that sometimes we wait for the certainty to be excited. Like if I
Hmm.
just knew da 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 da, then I could feel good or I could feel happy, right? And
Hmm.
so when we can, like you said, shift our focus and like it really is just an adventure. This whole earthly experience is one big adventure because even
Hmm.
people my age have uncertainty.
Hmm.
Every person on the planet has uncertainty because guess what? We don't know when we leave this earth,
Hmm.
right? So uncertainty is part of the human experience too. So it's something we don't necessarily have to be afraid of. And anyway, and resist, right?
Right, right.
Yeah.
Because that resistance is, I don't want to say a waste of energy because that sounds really brutal. But at the
Yeah.
same time, like that's a lot of energy that you're pushing and pushing and pushing with that is going in a direction that's not directed at anything.
Yeah.
Versus like having a, okay, this is uncertain. Like, I don't know if I'm going to get into my program in the fall, or I don't know where my kid's going to go to college next year if we're going from I don't want to say adult because I'm an adult too,
Yes.
but like a
Older,
older, yes, an
older
older
adult.
perspective of like, I don't know where my college student's going to go, if he wants to go to college or if he's going to go on a mission. But
Yeah.
that uncertainty is just time for us to discover and like rediscover who we are, what we're becoming, and how we view other people or how we're viewing our life path at that moment. It
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily mean that there's something like wrong.
Yeah. And I had this thought come to me like the becoming happens in the uncertainty. Don't you think?
Mm,
Like
that's
in
beautiful.
that space, that's where we tap into things that help us develop and grow. It's like
Right.
when we're certain, I don't know that there's a lot of growth that happens there. I mean, it
Right.
feels better for
Mhm.
sure. And I think there's times for that. That's like it's not necessarily wrong that we're in a place of certainty, but
Mhm.
maybe if we can embrace some of that, the uncertainty and what comes in that timing or that space as that growth and becoming
Mhm.
can happen there.
I think about like showing up for a client session and having a client, like you picture them as like a whole and resourceful human being. And in that way, like when we see that you guys are uncertain, like in our sessions, or I hear, I don't know, like that's just like an instinctual for me is like, okay, well, we're gonna tap into what you have inside of yourself. Like you are resourceful. You know what's gonna work best in your life. That is that time that we as coaches are like, okay, let's get them engaged and thinking about the actions and reactions that they're having in their life.
Yeah.
And that was just the thought that I had of like, wow,
Yeah.
uncertainty means that we're resourceful. That's when
Yeah.
we really get to activate that kind of skill inside of ourselves,
Yes.
saying, like, well, what do I want to do? Right. COVID happened. I was home. I didn't want to go to college. I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to try something crazy. I'm going to get certified as a life coach.
Yeah.
And look where it's gotten me. And like that was
Yeah.
uncertainty for me. And yet that has ended up to be one of the biggest
A
things that,
beautiful thing.
yeah, most
Yeah.
beautiful
So
things in my life.
beauty comes from the uncertainty many
Oh,
times.
that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Okay, I got to write that down. Um,
That's actually so interesting. I know we're not really on the topic that we kind of talked about in the beginning,
yeah.
but I just think I was so interesting because this last Sunday I was actually able to bear my testimony, and I made the comment about how I just recently went through the temple to receive my endowments, and I had made this stupid joke to my friend and said, I thought going through the temple was going to make my life easier. And she kind of laughed and said, I don't know who told you that, but that's not true.
Yeah.
And as I was bearing my testimony on Sunday, I kind of was stuck, but then I realized the gospel doesn't make my life easier, but it makes it more beautiful. And I think
Yes.
about that in comparison with the uncertainty because
Yeah.
we do have that rod to hold on to with the gospel. And
Yeah.
it's not going to make it necessarily easier to get through. We're not going to know exactly where we're supposed to step next. But because we have the gospel and because we have this uncertainty in these moments to pick and choose where we want to refocus our energies, we can really decide how to create and make our life beautiful and what we want it to be
Yeah.
with the use of the gospel,
Yeah.
obviously.
I love that. I love that. Yeah. It provides an opportunity to refocus and to awaken, right? To
Mhm.
what we know within us. So I
Mhm.
love that. So we've talked about some pretty cool stuff. So you work with young adults, you said,
Right.
and young
Mhm.
women that are kind of struggling to kind of figure out who they are and where they want to go. What do you see in the clients that you're working with? What do they struggle the most with, do you find?
Yeah, as of recently, I work a lot with like the health and wellness industry just because a lot of my clients, my niche is disordered eating and eating disorders. And so I get a lot of people who are struggling with perfectionism. And I talk about perfectionism all the time and with like dichotomous thinking of like the extremes. And as I was thinking about coming on and talking about that, I was actually like, no, you know what I think we should focus on is the word discipline, because I've had like one or two people come up to me, and as a life coach, they see me as someone credible, which is kind of funny. But they come up to me and they say, "How do you create more discipline?" Or like, "I would have the life that I wanted if, only if I had this much more discipline." And we see that a lot in the health industry too. Of, well, you have to be disciplined and consistent and effective with your goals. And this kind of buzzword that's thrown around so often is the word discipline, as if it's like a magic key to all of a sudden unlocking a life that you want, that you want to create, that it's like your dream. And so I wanted to come onto this podcast and have a discussion about that word because it's thrown around all the time. And yet I think it's misused. And it's
Yeah.
sometimes used in our brains against ourselves of like, well, if I only had more discipline. It's like, well, what
Yeah.
does that even mean? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
who decided that discipline meant that I have to write 8 hours a day and go to the gym 3 times a day and
Yeah.
like all of these really rigorous and kind of perfectionistic standards that we tell ourselves that we need to have that will unlock this life that we have been dreaming about. And yet we're all searching for more discipline. And so why have we not found it yet?
Yeah. Oh, I love that. This is such a good thing because I think no matter the age, you will hear women say, if I was just more disciplined, right? And it's
Mhm.
like we use it as a measuring stick to give us make us feel better or like we're doing a better job or we're getting it right. If we've tapped into that magic discipline,
Right.
whatever that really is, right? Then we'll be successful. Then we'll get what
Mhm.
we want, right? And again, I think it's that, yeah, it ties into that perfectionism that you were saying, but then it's so disempowering because we are using it as a way to value ourself, right?
Mhm.
And somehow we're measuring us against this idea, a subjective idea of what discipline is. Yeah.
Right, because in reality, like discipline in my life is going to look so different than discipline in someone else's life.
Yeah.
And so there's no way that I can be like, well, I don't have discipline because I don't, go to a job from 9 to 5 every day, or I don't have discipline because I'm not doing X, Y, and Z. It's like,
Yeah.
why are we holding this to ourselves and saying that this is something that we need in our lives when we don't even know what it would look like or what it means to us in our lives? Or we don't accept that label for ourselves, because I think sometimes we do that. We love these words. We're like, discipline. That sounds so nice and pretty, but I'm never going to put it on my name tag and say, oh, I'm disciplined.
Yeah.
Which I think is such a loss, because I think, I mean, thought work, like, that we are what we think. Um, and yet at the same time, like, if I'm always thinking, oh, I'm not disciplined, oh, I'm not disciplined, then
Mhm.
I'm never going to be able to develop that, because I'm never going to see it pop up in my life. I'm never going to magnify it in my life. And I'm never going to actually take it on myself and say, oh, wait, in this area, I am disciplined. And I'm proud of that.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think don't you think it kinda goes back to let's define it. Let's
Mhm.
define discipline and why we want it. Like, I think you have to
Ooh,
start
mhm.
there, right? Because if our why is because then I'll feel better about myself, or I'll be a better person, or people will view me as better, right?
Mhm.
We want to really check that. We want to check what's the why behind this abstract idea of discipline.
Right.
And what do we even mean by discipline? Is
Mhm.
it following through with the commitments we have with ourselves? Okay, let's look at that. But I think like you said, I think we misuse it as a way to force ourselves to do better,
Right.
right? Like I have to be disciplined. And if I am, then I'll be better. But it's
Mhm.
again that view, that mindset of having to be a certain way or behave a certain way because we'll be better doesn't really inspire. Like,
Right.
and the way you said it was like, and I've heard people say that, well, if I was just disciplined, right? There's so much like resignation there and so much shame there.
Mhm.
And
And it's
it's
almost
not
it's almost a
inspiring.
scapegoat too. Like, "Oh,
Yeah.
I only had discipline, I could do
Yep.
that, but guess what?
Yep.
I don't, so
So I,
bummer."
I'm the loser that I am or whatever,
Yeah,
right?
we're accepting that kind of like, "Well, I'm not good enough," so
Yeah.
that's our brains like, keeping us kind of stuck in
Yeah.
that hole.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. That's such a good I love this topic because I think it again it can apply to anyone. And so again, yeah, let's talk about like what does discipline even mean? How can we shift that focus?
Mhm. I love, like, your definition of discipline being like following through on commitments, or like following through on maybe even like substituting like your word in there, because I think sometimes, especially like having a viewpoint of like the health and fitness industry, I think of discipline as like getting done what needs to get done. But
Mhm.
again, that's so subjective of like I would have to go in and look at that and say, well, what has to get done really? And I think as life coaches, we're almost like linguists because we just pick up on these little words and we say, oh, we need to define those. And yet
Mhm.
it's so true because all of a sudden you're kind of going to start to realize your values. And I do this with my clients a lot of like bring into their awareness the word that they're using and be like, well, what does that mean to you? And then as soon as they kind of become aware of that, pull them into that question of saying like, well, where does this already pop up in your life? Because whether they know it or not, it already probably is in their life somewhere. And as long as we can give ourselves like a little bit of credit for what we're already doing to be quote unquote like disciplined, whatever that may be, like following through our commitments, it meant I picked up the phone call when I said I wasn't going to, even though I know my friend wanted to go to lunch with me,
Yeah.
or just following through on like the smallest things that can count as discipline. It doesn't have to be these grandiose examples. And
Yeah.
yet we sometimes just peg it as someone else's definition of like, oh, well, discipline would be, really hardworking, and I'm not a hard worker.
Yeah.
And yet we can pull into our perspective what our definition is. And it
Yeah.
changes everything because then all of a sudden we're personifying it and we know where that comes up in our lives already. And we can try to then magnify those and
Yeah.
become more intentional about creating those moments where we are like, oh, I said I was going to follow through on my commitments. And so guess what? Like, I'm going to hop on a call with 3 other people this week because I said I was going to. And that's
Mhm.
my goal.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And I think that it's meeting us where we are too. I think that is included in this because sometimes we view discipline as like, especially at a new year, right? Like
Oh, yeah.
all these goals and all these things we want to transform ourselves.
Mhm.
And for many of us, especially my age, they're the same goals that we've had forever and ever. And we just, we got to be more disciplined to do this. So we
Mhm.
do it again, right? And so it's meeting ourselves where we are. So if 10 goals, we're trying to be disciplined in these 10 things that kind of stretch us, right? And we have this
Mhm.
expectation that if we do them perfectly, then we're disciplined,
Right.
right? And so it's like, maybe meet yourself where you are. What would it
Mhm.
look like if you focused on one thing? And
Mhm.
it isn't necessarily about perfection. It's like, can we get 80%
Mhm.
and then celebrate that?
Can that be enough? Yeah, for
Can that
sure.
be
And I
enough?
think part of that is going back. I call it like a PB check of like the purpose and the benefit. Um, where you kind of ask yourself, like, what purpose is this goal going to have in my life? And like, what benefit would that bring
Yeah.
into my life? And in that way, I mean, you kind of touched on it earlier, was when we kind of get down and define like why we want that goal in our life. Like, why do we want more discipline in our life? Where is it going to be beneficial? Like, where is it going to add purpose and meaning and hope?
Yeah.
And if it's going to be beneficial in our lives, period.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I think that's sometimes that we just kind of skip over that part and we're like, oh, well, it's good to have a goal about, my weight, or it's good to have a goal about making money this year. And it's like, okay,
Yeah.
well, why? Because
Yeah.
once we
What's
kind
your
of
why?
uncover those, we get to that motivation.
Yeah.
And that we could do a whole other podcast on that word as
Yes.
well, because I do have a lot
Yes.
of people who come in and are like, I just need motivation. And I'm like, oh
Motivation.
my gosh,
Yep.
let's talk about this word now
Yeah.
too.
I
But
think these are sister words, right?
mhm,
Discipline, motivation, and productivity. I
right.
think those three are a false, we get a false sense of value
Hmm.
from those ideas or those words. Like if we're doing it right, if we were more motivated, if we were more productive, if we were more disciplined, then we're of worth,
Right.
right? And
Well, it's
then
so interesting that we use those three all against ourselves.
every
They're
time, it's never a compliment,
mhm.
right? Like, have you ever heard anyone say, I'm just so motivated, or I'm
Right.
so
It's hard to
productive?
come by, or like, I was so productive today. I mean,
Yeah.
even
And I'm,
yesterday, I was like, I did nothing productive
yeah, it's
today.
like, I think that there are times when we do say, oh, I was so productive, but we use it as a way to like lift ourselves, right? That
Or to
we
put
feel
our worth to it of
better.
like, oh,
Yeah.
because I was productive today,
Yes.
I closed out the day on a good note, or like,
Yeah.
that was a good day. And
Yeah.
where it's
It
like, no,
counts.
it counts. Yeah, it counts as something. I mean,
Yeah.
it does count as something, but at the same
Right.
time, like, that doesn't necessarily mean anything about our worth or the
Yeah.
value of the day.
Yeah. And I think that's at the end of this, that is the key, is if we are making our worth and value connected or a reflection of what we view discipline or productivity or motivation to be, we want to look at that.
Right.
Right. And I think that's where the problem comes, is when our value is tied to that. So
Hmm.
the more of those things we are, the more we are. But in reality, we're always here. We're always enough. We're always of worth. We're always great and amazing human beings because God created us. It actually has
Right.
nothing to do with us.
Hmm.
And so I think that when we can get to that place, which is not always easy, right? But when we can start separating that identity with those things, then
Hmm.
we have a better ability to actually start moving in the direction we want.
Oh, for sure.
Right? Yeah, I love that. So how do you help? I loved how you said the PB checkup. I love
Hmm.
that. Purpose and benefit. Like that is so cool because it's like if you can find its purpose and how it's going to help you be your best, not
Hmm.
increase your worth, but increase your life, like create a life you want, right? Like
Hmm.
there's your motivation, right?
Right. Well, it's
There's
these clients that come in and they have a reason for wanting to do something
Mhm.
or needing to change something. And they're like, well, I know I need to have this. And like, I love that it's a PB check, like the end is a benefit check, because
Yes.
really we're all trying to just create our lives like 1% better every single day. We're all trying to become better humans, just better 1%. It's never like anyone wants, you know, like a what would be like a purpose and
Yeah.
unbenefit check of like, oh, I
Right.
want to make sure this is decreasing the work, like the
Right.
experience of my life. It's like, no, we want to make sure that we're continually cultivating things that are adding benefit to our lives. And
Yeah.
again, that comes down to like having those realizations of like, okay, what purpose is this going to serve in my life? And what is the benefit of either succeeding in this or having this in play?
Mhm. Yeah. And that's so individual. Right?
Hmm.
And that's the beautiful thing. Like it doesn't depend on anybody else's opinion or anything. It's all personal. Your purpose and benefit is going to look totally different than someone else's.
Right. Even if you have
Yeah.
somewhat similar goals. I mean, I
Yeah.
think that's why the new year is all exciting and there's so much buzz around it, is just because everyone kind of wants to set new goals because it seems like a turning point, right? We're kind
Yeah.
of forced into that like awakening moment of like, oh, it's 20 for 24. I
Yeah.
hope you're ready to be refocused. And it's like, whoa.
Yeah.
Which is why I really give credit to the people who can just do that like mid February. I love those people
Yeah.
who kind of are like, well, my new year is usually in spring because that's
Yeah.
when I find that my mental health is better so that I can do those goals that I want to set out
Yeah.
and accomplish.
Yeah.
And again, it does come back to like also making sure that you have a balance of, if I'm going to set 10 goals, is that realistic?
Yeah.
Because they all might have purpose and benefit in your life,
Yeah.
but you can't overwork yourself like that. You
Yeah.
can't focus on that many because
Yeah.
again, you're going to take that word discipline and you're going to try to stretch it out and try to input it into these different goals that already don't have a space in your life at the current moment. And it's like
Yeah.
you've got to pick your priorities and understand which ones will benefit you the most to help you be building blocks for the next ones that you're going to try to achieve.
Yes. Yes. And I often, and you probably do similar, like when I work with clients, we talk about the GPS, right? We look at where we are, the current location, and where we want to go. And
Right.
sometimes we're so focused on where we want to go, we want to
Hmm.
hurry and jump there, right?
Right.
Or we're where we are and we see this big gap. And so
Hmm.
then I think that's where that tendency to go, if I was just more disciplined, then I would be here already, right? It feels
Hmm.
like a race or something. But that's the thing, is like, to get where we have to, where we want to go, where we desire to go, requires our current location. A GPS
Hmm.
does not work without a current location. And then it
Right.
maps out a route,
Hmm.
right? And so every goal or everything that you're trying to progress to is one spot on the route. We aren't actually, we don't jump to the destination. We move through the route, and it bends and curves and climbs and descends, and right, it's like it's an adventure. And so I think if we can view it that way, like, if we simplify it and go, what's 1 to 3 things that I want to focus on, that's
Hmm.
going to get me to this part in my route.
Proud. I love
Then,
that.
right, and then here's a few more. Once I've kind of got a handle on these, what can I add? But
Right.
never running faster than we're able.
Hmm. I think
Yeah.
that's a good analogy too, just in the sense that I mean, we can take a wrong turn, and if we get mad at ourselves and say, "Oh my gosh, well, this is just a disaster now. I might as well take, you know, do a victory lap or something
Yeah.
and take a loop and then make it back to my route." Like that's not discipline in that area,
Yeah.
but also we don't give ourselves the chance to kind of reroute and be like, oh wait, this is now a refocus of where I'm gonna end up, and this GPS is gonna reroute myself, and I might
Yeah.
get there 1 minute later, but guess
Yeah.
what, I'm still getting there, and
Still
that's
get,
not gonna change that destination. It's just gonna change the way that it looks to get
yeah.
there.
And the route is what it's all about. Like, sometimes I think we lose sight of why we're here.
Hmm.
Like, I think there's a lot of, and to go back to your idea of perfectionism, right? Like, I think sometimes we think we're supposed to get it all right.
Right.
We're up in heaven and our heavenly parents are saying, yeah, we're going to send you on vacation. I don't think they said that. I think
Hmm.
they said, we're going to send you to this experience. It's going to be hard and messy. And that's why we have a savior, is because you're going to have to reroute all the time.
Right.
But that rerouting, there's beauty there. And again, it's
Hmm.
that uncertainty. It goes along the same lines, right? It's like there's beauty wherever we are in the route if we'll look
Hmm.
for it. And that's why we're here, is it's experiencing the route.
Right. And I think it's easy to think of repentance in this process too with discipline, because I think of even Jesus Christ with the adulterous woman, he said, go and sin no more. And I think we kind of gloss over that last phrase like
Yeah.
really quickly because
Yeah.
he was not expecting her to go and not sin ever again. Like
Yeah.
that would be unreasonable for him to ask us of that. Like he wouldn't say that to us. He wouldn't say, be you perfect right now. He's
Yeah.
saying, no, be you perfect with the mortal experience that you are gaining.
Yeah.
Um, and that's the beauty of our Redeemer and our Savior Jesus Christ, is through him we
Mm.
can kind of find where maybe we need to be more like him, in the regard that we aren't perfect,
Yeah.
but he will make us perfect.
Yeah. He's always on the he's always in the car with us,
Mhm.
right? Trying to help us find the recalibrate, right?
Right.
Right. But I've talked about this on my podcast before too, and the idea of repentance. And I think it applies really well with this conversation too, is sometimes we do view repentance as just quit sinning, right?
Mhm.
Being better. And I actually have expanded my view of that. And in the Bible dictionary, it says it's a fresh view about God,
Mhm.
of oneself, and of the world, and a change of heart, which is a change of focus, right? And
Mhm.
so it's like as we continually change our view, like get a better view
Mhm.
and an eternal perspective, or, turn to Him to help us see, um, that's along the way. Like more understanding, more growing, developing, that's repentance.
Right. Oh, I love that because that just sparks right back to the conversation that at hand of discipline and everything of like,
Yeah.
well, I want to urge people like who are listening to this, like then if that's what you're struggling with, if there's another buzzword that you're struggling with of like, oh, I just can't be mindful or I'm not, I'm not perfect, sit down and define that word. Like we talked about this. And really, those are these experiences where you might think you know exactly what's going on, but we have no idea how it's going to look in an eternal perspective, or even just from someone else's outside perspective. And like that can take a whole different shift. And as long as we understand the meanings that we're coming in with, it will
Mhm.
make it so much easier on the backside to realize, is that really what I need? Is that really going to be beneficial? Is this really what the Savior wanted me to learn from this experience? Is this really what this experience is for?
Yeah, yeah. And just refocusing, reawakening, right? I think it's just, yeah, it's part of the journey,
Mhm.
right? Sometimes we think we just put our heads down and hurry and get there. And it's like, no, let's look out the windows, let's appreciate the views, let's enjoy the vistas
Mhm.
and even the climb, right? Like
Right.
it's all part of the process. But I love that, like just slowing down and really understanding what we're making something mean, or what it means to
Mhm.
us, and how is that impacting how what we're doing in our life. And
Mhm.
if we can fine tune those definitions to what they really mean to us, that help us find our purpose and our benefit,
Mhm.
right? Like that's so key. We really have to come to know ourselves
Right.
so that we
And I
can
think you
begin
have
that process.
you have to start giving yourself credit too for where you've come from and what you've been given and what you're creating already. And I think that is something that I notice a lot in people too. Is they'll come and they'll say like, "Oh, I'm not disciplined enough to do this." And I'm like, "Well, what have you been disciplined enough to do?" And they're like, "Oh, well, I guess I did this and this and this." And I'm like, "Well,
Yeah.
how does that impact?" Like yes, let's pull on those experiences as examples of discipline. But more
Mhm.
importantly, let's give ourselves a little bit of credit before we start trying to cut ourselves down at the knees
Yeah.
and make it 10 times harder for us to crawl out of that pit of saying, I'm not motivated, I'm not disciplined, I'm not productive.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah. Celebrate. I love that. Like I have my 100th episode is coming out in a few weeks,
Oh
and
my
it's
gosh,
all about, I know,
congratulations.
I'm so excited.
That's
And
huge.
it's all about celebrating.
Hmm.
I think that's such a valid point, is like, let's slow down and like give ourselves credit and celebrate the good we are and the good we do, and just relish in that. This doesn't mean we don't want to progress, but it's like, let's not just throw out everything out the window for discipline. Let's
Right.
celebrate and work honoring our commitments. Let's hold both.
I think that's beautiful. I really like that idea of holding both because I
Yeah.
think sometimes, again, it's going back to that perfectionism. It's going back to that very dichotomous thinking of like, well, if I'm this, then I'm not that, or it's black or it's white. It's so imperative, I think, in our life to learn that we can be both. Like I can have discipline and I can be unproductive, or I can
Yeah.
be productive and I can be undisciplined. And
Yeah.
it's again going back to those like sister words, like you said, like we cherish those and we hold those above our head more often than not.
Yeah.
We flaunt them almost in a way,
Yeah.
and yet
Yeah.
at the same time, that's not our worth. That's not the whole experience here on this life,
Yeah.
and we can have both of those experiences
Yeah.
and still keep working on things at the same time. I
Yeah.
don't want this podcast to be something where someone's listening and is like, well, I don't actually need discipline, or like, I don't actually know what discipline means to me, so it doesn't
Yeah.
apply.
Yeah.
Because I think discipline is keeping committed and persevering.
Hmm.
And those are gospel, like Christ-like attributes that we want to develop and that we want to continually work on. And yet to be so strict on ourselves, or to continually label ourselves as the opposite,
Yeah.
is only like degrading, or making our purpose seem small and inconsiderate in size of what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah. Yeah. So beautiful. So if there's one thing that you want to leave with listeners, no matter their age, but something that you find helpful with your clients that you just want, like they could begin today doing
Mhm.
to help them maybe work towards more discipline if they want, or, but just kind of what something that would help them kind of move towards where they want to be instead of beating themselves up.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that. And I think that's something that I do with my clients, like right off the bat, is I make them tell me like soul values or things that they value. And these are usually like, I pull up the Brene Brown like character attribute list,
Mhm.
because I'm a big fan of Brene Brown.
Yeah,
If she ever
love
hears
her.
one of these, I would cry. But
Yeah.
I pull up those lists and I ask them, and I say, what are things that you have noticed, like common themes in your life, or values that you want to hold in your life? And it can be like, I want to be more disciplined, or I value connection and I value family. I have a client who she values tradition because she's half Samoan, and so she loves that. And I ask my clients, and I usually prod my friends too, of wanting them to tell me what they value in their life. Um, and if they don't have a list, like to start one,
Mm.
and then to put those somewhere that you can see it either every day or that you can reflect on continually. Because what's my biggest fun as a coach is I have those for each of my clients. The next session that they come in, and I usually put them on a sticky note on every single note page I take for them. And I can pull those out in session and say, well, oh, like maybe your discomfort is coming because you're having friction against your value of connection, like someone was
Yeah.
is mean to you and that rubs that value in a wrong way. Or, oh my gosh, like when you are talking about like how pretty or like how much painting is like a benefit to you, like that's your value of having like an aesthetic life. And I really love it when people know what they find valuable, because I think the more you see it in your life, that it's going to appear,
Mm.
right? And even if it's just like, I value discipline, actually like following through on commitments, like that's something that I want to begin to embody. If I put that down on a sticky note, or on my note page, or I'm journaling about it and I'm like, where was I disciplined today, then it's
Mhm.
going to become more fruitful in my life. And that's the beautiful thing about experience, is the more that you notice these things, like the more that it's going to happen. And I think that's where manifestation kind of gets like thrown around nowadays. And yet it's so true, because I know God, if I say to God, God, I love love, like I want to focus on being a loving and compassionate human being, He's going to give me experiences and examples and situations where I can express that,
Yeah.
because that's a value I have, and it's a Christ-like attribute and something that is doing more good in the world. He's going to let me keep experiencing that because it's valuable to me and it's more valuable to him.
Yeah. I love that. I think that's so beautiful. I love value work too. I just think
Mhm.
when we take the time to know what's important to us, we can create it exactly as you
Right.
said. So I
Mhm. And
love
you kind
that.
of have to define it. I feel like we're kind of
Yeah.
forcing you. I'm
Yeah.
over here trying to get you to do like two birds with one stone.
Yeah.
Because when you sit
Yeah.
down and you're like, I value tradition, you're like, well,
Yeah.
what does that actually
What does that
mean? Or
mean? Yeah.
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 So I'm
And I
actually
love
just
how,
trying to get you to define the words that we want you to
yes. Yeah.
encompass.
Well, because then like you gave a really good example, is because then we can see where we're struggling, right? Because if this value is important to me and we're bumping up against something that's different than that, it
Mhm.
makes sense that that's
Mhm.
a struggle within us. And how, now what? How do we want to move forward? Understanding that. How can we use that to our benefit? So I love that. I think that's such a good advice. Just start listing
Mhm.
values that are important to you, and then start noticing, pay attention
Right.
where they
And you
show
could
up.
even flip it, like start with something that's really that upsets you. Because I
Yes.
think sometimes that's where you find your values the
Yes.
quickest, is when you're like, oh my
Yes.
gosh, I had this situation happen where I felt belittled. And it's
Mhm.
like, wait, oh, I value when I'm seen and heard and listened to. And then it's
Yes.
like, wait, that's something that I value. I value being seen and heard and listened to.
Yeah.
It's like I'm uncomfortable, or it really, I love the word friction, because I think that's as close as we're going to get to something like that. Because it's more of that kind of like energy work of, okay,
Yeah.
this is something that's unsettling to me, and yet I don't know why. And of course, like we want to say, well, what's the thought behind it? But it
Yeah.
can just be that feeling of, well, what's that feeling? What's
Yeah.
coming up for you? Like, why
Yeah.
do you think that's uncomfortable for you to experience?
Yeah. I love that. I love that. That's exactly how I found like connection is really important to me.
Mm,
And I discovered it because of the opposite. Some conflict and disconnection that was
mhm,
happening in a relationship. And it was like, oh, because connection's so important to me. That's why this is
mm,
hard. Right. So
mhm.
there is a lot we can learn from that. So good. Oh my heck. I could talk to you forever,
I
Clarice. This
know. I
is
really
so
love this.
good.
This was so fun, Jill. Thank you for having me so much.
You are so wise for a 23-year-old. I'm going to tell you that.
You're so
So
sweet.
wise. And you are going to bless so many people's lives. I love that you are out there doing the work. So thank you so much for doing the work.
Oh, thank you. I so
Your
appreciate that. I'm really trying. So
Yeah, your people
it's
need you.
mhm.
They really do. So, how can people find you?
So you can find me on Instagram. That's how I stay pretty relevant with people my age. You don't just have to be 23 to follow me, though. Please don't think that. And it's Coaching by Clarice. And I try to keep the content to be separated from like general life coaching advice to specific to disordered eating. And so it kind of falls into two groups. And if
Yeah.
you're just bored, you can scroll and see
Yeah.
some cheesy reels. But you can also find me. I have a page called balancedrecovery.coach. And that's kind of, I put more of my story up there and resources to how to find me.
Yeah.
And if you want to connect with me and just hop on a consult call. I also just love talking with people for hours, but for 30
Yeah.
minutes, you can hop on a consult call with me and we can see if we're a good vibe.
Awesome. So good. Thank you, Clarice. Thank you so much for listening. If you like what you hear, I would love it if you would share it with your friends and family and leave me a rating and review. If you'd like to learn more about what life coaching is, please schedule a free discovery call with me where we can work together through something that's causing you a problem. Just go to my website, seasons-coaching.com, and you can also find information about my Seasons of Joy one-on-one coaching program and my Seasons of Joy community. Have a joyful week, and I'll see you next time.